Oktoberfest. Today is Thursday, at least for some of us. So today is all about data, AI, and machine learning again. My name is Nora. I'm a developer advocate. And I'm joined here with Ted Wei and Daniel Dahlmeier. And I'm super excited we made this session happen today because we actually have the most uncompatible time zones, I think. So I'm in Germany, and it's very early for me. And I kind of forgot that there's absolutely no light here, which is why I'm kind of like in the shadows of the light up there. But I think, Daniel, that you are in Singapore right now, right?
I'm based in Singapore. That's right. So it's 1 p.m. here. Good timing for me.
Okay, so you actually have the most normal time here. And then I realized
which is not
that...
normally the case. Usually it's always super
Sure.
late for us.
Sure.
But thanks for making this a good time for me. Yeah.
You got lucky. It was Ted's fault because I realized I actually sent you the wrong date, Ted. Because whenever I send like reminders to my speakers, I write the date and the subject. And I think for you, I wrote the 17th, but you're not even on Thursday yet, right?
We're not Thursday. We're still kind of behind the times. So hello from Wednesday.
Yeah, so I'm glad you made it and you didn't actually join the call later. Well, today, so for your tomorrow, it's kind of confusing. So the reason why I wanted to hear, and I wanted both of you here before I realized the time zones were just so horrible, was because I remember how I heard about large language models or like GPT the first time, and I was actually on parental leave, and my husband comes in and he's like, Nora, you know, there's this new chatbot, you have to try it out. And I'm like, no, I don't want to try another chatbot that doesn't understand me and that when I have a typo in, it doesn't know what I'm talking about. I was like, I don't want to try it. He's like, no, you have to try it. I'm like, okay, I tried it. And it was awesome. And I was like, okay, wow. Because I just researched like creative AI and stuff a couple of months before, and I didn't realize it was this far already, right? So I was really blown away. And then I came back from parental leave, and I didn't really know how SAP was handling everything and what we were doing. So my friend and also colleague told me to call you, Daniel, and basically ask you what we're doing. I don't know if you remember the call, but you really helped me so much. And I remember I just joined the call basically like, help me, you know, like I have no idea what SAP is doing and where to get started. And you just really gave me this wonderful intro of what the plan was and what your team is working on. Yeah, then Ted, I met the first time at SAP Insider in Las Vegas. And I remember that I joined some of the sessions and I was thinking, okay, I know most of those things. It's basically my job to know about AI at SAP, right? So I was like, I don't have to join another session. So I prepared for my session, and then the people came out of your session and they were like, that was the best session. It was so wonderful. And I'm like, no, I missed it. But someone recorded it. So I actually watched your recording later, and it was a really great session. And I thought, okay, we kind of need you here and Daniel here to talk about like large language models and what SAP is doing and all these questions that I get every single time when I have a hands-on session. I kind of wanted you to be here and talk about it so that we can just help people get started, right? Yeah, so Daniel, how did you get started? How did you hear about it the first time? How was it for you? Did your team already work on it for a long time, or was it kind of a surprise?
For the large language models. So I have a background in natural language processing. So I did natural language processing in my PhD work, which is a while ago. So when I was finishing my PhD, deep learning just started to really take off. And I remember we were sitting in the lab and read these first papers, and then like, wow, if this would work, I mean, this would be really a big game changer. And people started to get really excited about it. Say, hey, do you think it could ever work for machine translation? No, this will not work because it's different from computer vision and so on. Because a lot of the deep learning stuff really started in speech and computer vision, and then only later was applied to NLP, which is more on discrete tokens rather than continuous signals. And then now what we have is, whatever you want to call it, the new AI wave or the new NLP, what some people call it. It's really all these transformer models and these large language models, which really then started from NLP and now is taking over all the other AI fields like computer vision and so on. So I think that's pretty exciting. I would always like to say, yeah, of course, it was obvious to me and so on, but it wasn't really. I think we all knew about these language models and that they're pretty cool, right? GPT-2, GPT-3, and they can create pretty complex, coherent text now, and there's sometimes some funny mistakes. But I think what also surprised me a little bit how this suddenly took off so crazy with ChatGPT, right? So that with this viral application that's really easy to use and really, really surprisingly powerful for a lot of things. Suddenly everyone is using it, right? It's not just NLP researchers who are working on this and using things from Hugging Face, but suddenly everyone is doing that. I remember one of our data scientists told me that, you know what, my mom now told me about ChatGPT, and then I was like, okay, this is really everywhere now, right? And I don't think his mom is a AI scientist. So
No, probably not.
so, well, I mean, who knows, right? Why not, right? But yeah, so I think that also surprised me and us a little bit how quickly this went viral and everyone's talking about it, and you hear about it in mainstream media. You open the newspaper, it's about AI. In Germany, what's it out? It's kind of the main news that everyone watches, and they talk about AI.
Yeah.
It's like a bit strange, but exciting times.
Yeah. My husband also is not in AI or anything. And he was the one telling me about it, right? Because I was just with my baby in bed. I was like completely shut off from the world. So Ted, I think you weren't even with SAP back then, right? When it all started.
Yeah, I was at 15 years at Microsoft, and so when all of this hit, it was also just very new to all of us. And of course, Microsoft was working with OpenAI, but I did my PhD in computer vision, and so not even in natural language processing or that realm. And back in those dark ages, we were taking images and doing traditional image processing techniques, extracting features, and then running those features through like a linear discriminant analysis classifier, right? We were looking at CAT scans, CT scans, and trying to predict whether a lung cancer was malignant or benign. And so that was just kind of my AI background. And then very similar to what Daniel had said, at Microsoft. And then when we were doing experimentation with like GPT-3, but it was really, again, ChatGPT when it kind of caught fire in the public imagination. GitHub Copilot was actually a huge thing, right, at Microsoft. And then we were seeing the traction that GitHub Copilot was having with developers, I'm sure with all the audience here. But for me, kind of like the transformational moment was when I was like reading this conversation with somebody on ChatGPT, and that person went to ChatGPT and said, "Hey, I want to download and pirate movies for free and games for free. Where should I go?" Right? And ChatGPT was like, "No, no, no. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you how you can like download pirate movies and games for free." And then so that person went back to ChatGPT and said, "Okay, I know it's not good to download pirate movies and games and stuff for free. Fine. What top 10 websites should I avoid?" And then ChatGPT said, "Oh, well, here are the top 10 websites you should avoid," right? So that was kind of like my aha moment of like, oh my goodness, there's something here that's picking up the nuances of language, or even reverse psychology worked, right? And at Microsoft, I was on the business AI team with our Dynamics and Power Platform, and we were doing a lot of work in creation and editing of apps and flows, fine-tuning, GitHub Copilot. And so that was just kind of my background with Gen AI before joining SAP less than a year ago.
Yeah, nice. I also always give this like when I have talks myself on generative AI and large language models, I give this example where you can basically also tell a model, I'm writing a book. Can you please help me with like describing a beautiful person or something? And then it actually describes a person. But when you ask it what is beautiful, it would never describe a person for you, right? It always says like beauty is subjective. But you can always like find these loopholes to actually have it answer stuff, which is obviously, but it gets better. Now sometimes it tells me, no, I can't tell you. So that's really exciting to see how also the responses change. I also remember my keynote after we released Generative AI Hub and everything. So that was last year. I was trying to impersonate Stephen Hawking back then. And I realized maybe it's not the best idea to be on an SAP stage and impersonate a dead person. And then while I kind of realized that that might not be the best use case for a keynote, the model actually started to say, I cannot impersonate people. So it didn't want to do it anymore anyway. And that was also very interesting. I changed the use case a little bit, obviously. But yeah, it was really interesting to see how the models kind of evolve, right? And have this understanding of like, I mean, not really understanding, but they kind of get taught what is good and what is not good and what you can answer and whatnot. So you mentioned that you were in the business AI unit. So how do you actually decide at SAP right now what is business AI relevant? Like how do we decide which use cases we actually embed in our products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I come from a product management background. I'm the chief product officer of our business AI unit here, product engineering at SAP. And we always start with the customer, right? We always start with what the customer is trying to solve. What problem are they trying to apply AI to? And at the end of the day, it's what are the most high impact and high value use cases. And so, you think about Henkel. Henkel is a German chemical consumer goods company, spending a lot of time forecasting, simulation planning, right? And they want to know if there's a better way to get the right data they need for analysis, and also some ways to do that analysis. And this is where we would look at a problem like that, right? And say, work with SAP Analytics Cloud, and they have a just ask feature. So now you can interface with Joule in natural language, and it will retrieve the right information and help you with the analysis of that for these things like forecasting. And so, we look at high impact, high value, and we also want to make sure that not everything may necessarily require generative AI, right? Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the hype and say, oh, everything can be solved with Gen AI, which is not the case, right? So those are ways in which we evaluate use cases and decide which ones we should work on.
Yeah, so talked to some product managers, and they actually told me that this generative AI hype kind of just also had people start to understand the value of machine learning in general. And now that people are a little bit more aware of what AI can do, they are also more inclined to not use generative AI models, but also use like more, I don't know, statistical learning or just standard machine learning approaches that we have been having in place, but no one was really like, I don't know how to say, like bold enough to try it, right? Like all the customers were always like kind of cautious. And now that there's this AI wave, it kind of makes people understand there's value here. And it doesn't always have to be generative AI, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Daniel, how do you then decide what use cases you work on and if a use case is feasible? Like I often get this question, I don't know, having a talk somewhere and someone comes up to me and is like, so I have this data set and I have this idea. Is it feasible? And I'm like, it's a lot of like gut feeling and try and error for me. I don't know how you guys do it in your team.
Yeah, well, the first answer is TED, and the colleagues tell us what we should build. But the other thing is, of course, whether it's feasible. Yeah, the answer is you need to try. So machine learning is just extremely empirically driven. There's not so much theory where you can calculate that yes, this will work or this will not work, or just look at a use case and say, yes, will work, no, will not work. Of course, if you have been working in the field for a while, you might have some kind of idea, a gut feeling. You can look at the published literature. And so there's a few things where we can definitely say, yes, this will work, right? I give you a piece of text, you tell me the sentiment, good or bad. Yes, this works. There are tons of models for that. This kind of works off the shelf. Machine translation, yes, it also works. We all know that from our own experience with Google Translate or SAP with our empty workbench. Perfect, no, but in general, this is pretty usable technology. And then there's a lot of things we just need to try. Also, we need to try, right? So there's a lot of ideas of, hey, can machine learning do this? Can machine do that? Can LLMs do this? And yeah, the answer from us is usually, oh, you need to try. I think the good thing with these LLM models is now that trying got a lot easier. So when we started with machine learning, deep learning, the answer for us was also, yes, you need to try, and it depends, and maybe it will work, maybe it will not work. But to try, first, maybe you need to get 1,000 examples, and you need to label them, and then you need to train a model, and then you need to test it on the test set, and then you have the metric, and then you see whether the accuracy is good enough for what you want to do, and then whether there's business value here or not. So the entrance barrier was relatively high, and like, oh, first you need to get us this data and all the labeling, and that was a little bit like a high entrance barrier for somebody who just had an idea, then said, oh, never mind, right? This is too much work. I think now with these LLMs and these chatbot interfaces like ChatGPT or also our internal playground, we say, here's a little text box, and you can just describe your problem in plain English or not even English, just in natural language. And maybe it will work, and you can quickly try out different ways of doing this, different prompts. So it's not that you need to first understand, has all this data, and need to know machine learning and then how to train a support vector machine or something like this, or even an LSTM and no Python. So it's much easier also for domain and business experts to try this out. And if this looks promising, maybe talk with your product owner or someone else whether we should move this towards productizing it, maybe a proof of concept, maybe some co-innovation with customers, also internal use cases. So we see a lot of people also in our own business, let's say in marketing or so on, who are very, very creative in how to use these things for their own problems. And some of these ideas then actually do make it into our roadmap to be part of our standard portfolio. So yeah, I mean, you have to try. you have to test. I think the good thing is you can just start with the prompt engineering, just basically playing around with this. And then the next step is you have a test set that you can run this more empirically and hopefully have a good enough coverage to be more confident that this was not a kind of lucky punch, but this actually works consistently and reliably.
So how do you kind of decide like which models you use for what? I know that, for example, in AI Launchpad, when you go to Generative AI Hub, you see that there are these labels like text and images on some of the models. Also, some models don't show up in the chat because they're embedding models. And then sometimes people ask me, like, why do I even need embedding models with these gigantic context windows now? And what would you say to that?
Right. Yeah. Models usually come in two types, as you said. There's embedding models and there's generation models. Embedding models take a piece of input, text, and then give you a vector that somehow represents this in some kind of semantics. And this is something you need for things like search, right? So if I want to find documents that are similar to my question, then I embed the question to a vector and compare it with all the vectors from my documents, and I find similar documents that have similar semantics and can then maybe use it in a downstream task like a quick chatbot question answering also.
Okay, so that's where the HANA vector
models,
engine comes in, right?
Exactly. The HANA vector engine is a vector store where you input these vectors. You need the model to generate these vectors, but then you need somewhere to store it and do the retrieval, and that you can do, for example, with HANA. The other things are the generation models, and I think these are the ones that people are more familiar with, right? A language model that generates text. You give it a prompt and it generates text. And of course, there's also a lot of multimodal ones now where you can have images as input or video or audio, and maybe also images, video, and audio as output. So across these different modalities and also mixed modality domains. But if you just look at the text models, which models are the best? I'm kind of repeating myself, but again, you need to test this empirically. So the answer for everything is you have to try. But what we usually tell people where they should start, just because you've got so many of these models, is start with a kind of state-of-the-art model, so something that's cutting edge now in terms of their capabilities. GPT-4o maybe something, or the latest Llama models, or the Gemini 1.5 models. So pick kind of the best that are available in whatever platform you're working on, maybe in the Gen AI Hub from SAP. So maybe take GPT-4 or GPT-4o or Gemini 1.5. And then if it doesn't work there, then you don't really need to try the smaller and cheaper model. But you kind of first establish feasibility with prompt engineering and whatever you need to do. And if it works, then you probably should go down in terms of like smaller models, cheaper models, and find the best price performance ratio, the best bang for the buck, because there's also cost associated with it. And at least if you really want to productize it, that's important as well. And the other thing is latency as well. The bigger models that have more capabilities are not only more expensive, they're also slower. So if you're concerned about latency and real-time factors, you want to try a smaller model. So you kind of can go down. And if you have a proper test set, as I mentioned earlier, then there are also tools where you can run your test set against all of these different models, and you basically get a big table that shows you of how well does it work. Does each use case work for each model? So you then can make your choices. The other thing, you can also just look at these benchmarks that also researchers publish on the web. You can look at the Helm benchmark from Stanford, or the Hugging Face leaderboard, or the chatbot arena, that give you a first idea what are the best models. Or you can also look at different scenarios they test. And this is also what we do internally. So we run all the models that we use internally or evaluate internally against a battery of different test scenarios, including general tests from academia, from research, from open source, but also SAP-specific internal scenarios to see what are the trade-offs and what is the best performance, what is the best performance trade-off between cost and performance and accuracy. So again, very empirical, but I think it makes sense to first look at feasibility with a state-of-the-art model, and then find the best trade-off between the accuracy that we get and the cost and latency that come with it.
I'm kind of glad you say that, because that's also what I always tell people. And I was kind of worried that wasn't like the way that you should be doing it, because I think I'm the only one here that doesn't
exactly
have a PhD.
what we're doing. Yeah.
I only have a master's degree in AI, so I kind of feel like left behind, but it's okay. So why should people use models via Generative AI Hub, Ted, like instead of going to the model providers directly? What is the value of Generative AI Hub?
Yeah, I think the Gen AI Hub, in addition to having a lot of these orchestration capabilities that enable you to create pipelines to leverage all the state-of-the-art LLMs, like Daniel was saying. I mean, I think there's some major reasons. And first, like Gen AI Hub, right, has access to your SAP data estate. And so everything that you've done with your SAP data, right, all the permissions and all the configurations, right, that stays, and you are essentially bringing that compute to your data. I know a lot of hyperscalers would want to say, hey, just send all of your SAP data into one big data lake, for example. But then there's so much that you lose when you do that, right? But when the data is in your SAP ecosystem and it stays there, Gen AI Hub is right there, and then you can access your LLMs through that. So that's really the first reason. And then second is really just going back to all the different LLMs that you can use, right? A lot of the hyperscalers will say, hey, bring your own license. And it sounds like it's a big convenience, but in reality, what that means is you have to go to each LLM provider and you have to sign a license agreement before you can use that model in production, for example. And what Daniel says is so important. Today, the barrier to entry is very low. You can try a model. Andre Karpathy said English is the hottest new programming language, right? So try things out, test it on your data, and try all these different models. Every single model has a different characteristic, right? And so we've signed all the different license agreements. We've made more than 25 LLMs available to you, right? So you have that spectrum of models that you can use to find the best model for your specific use case and to experiment in order to help solve your problem most effectively. And that is really, I think, the capabilities of Gen AI Hub. And of course, we ensure data privacy, data isolation, right? We're not going to save your prompts. We're not going to use them. Data is encrypted in transit, right? All of these things that we ensure with Gen AI Hub.
And I know you just said that the data kind of stays in SAP in this ecosystem. I know that we have some models deployed and some we are proxying for. And I know that especially in Germany, where a lot of companies are very conservative, sometimes it's very important for them to kind of like not have the data leave the place. So how does it work? Do we have to send data to the models, or is it always staying in our ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there's two ways that we do this. One is there are some models that we host and you have direct access to in SAP AI Core, right? There's Mistral, and that's a European company, and we have models from them. And so you can keep that model within AI Core, and you have the ability to be able to just send your data to that, and then within the context of your SAP ecosystem, and that never leaves, right? Some IBM models and other open source models are models that we host directly in AI Core. On the other hand, there are some models such as GPT, right, that are available via Azure OpenAI. We got the Gemini models from Google Cloud, or the Anthropic, Claude models, and Amazon models on Amazon Bedrock, right? In these situations, the LLM providers don't hand us the model, right? We don't have the actual GPT models that we can host in AI Core. We are required to have to proxy the calls to them because they're hosted on those hyperscalers. But in that case, we ensure that, again, the same promises that we have in Gen AI Hub, your data is encrypted in transit, data privacy, and we ensure from the terms and conditions that, the prompts are not saved and they're not used to like retrain the models or anything like that. We just also make sure of that, even though the data will be proxied over to these hyperscalers. But your privacy, super important, right? Trust is something that takes a long time to build up and only can be, and can be destroyed in an instant. So we take that super seriously when it comes to data privacy and customer trust.
Great. And I know that one thing that a lot of people kind of misunderstand, and why a lot of people that talk to me at least think that whatever they send to the model is being used to train the model, is because they remember what you said, right? To an extent. Right. And that's why I always want to clear that up. It's not that when you talk to a model, the model immediately remembers what you say. It doesn't have like a little brain somewhere in the OpenAI universe that saves everything about you, right? The model knows what you said because the chat application you're using is sending the history to the model every single time. And that's the only reason why it knows what you said in the 5 messages before, or however long the history is that's being sent.
Exactly.
Right? So the model is not actually learning on whatever,
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think the model, in data science terms, inference only, right? Basically, if you give it an input and you set the temperature to 0, you'll get the same output, right? And that means the model doesn't change. The weights are fixed, right? You send in the input, you get the exact same output with the exact same input. No sense of, oh, the model is getting smarter, or the model's learning your data and sending it to your competitors or anything like that. There's the peripheral services that might be storing based on that context. There's some transient memory, and then that memory is added to the prompt of the next turn of the conversation, and then the model says, oh, okay, based on this context, I will respond in a way that makes it sound like I remember, but it's kind of like it's like someone who has a very, very short-term memory and doesn't remember the conversation from 5 seconds ago unless you remind it.
Yeah, exactly. So Daniel, you already talked about the different models that are there, and for different use cases, different models might be better, but there are also things that you can do with a model, right? You can either try to improve your results with like prompt engineering, or you can try to implement a retrieval augmented generation use case, or if that doesn't work, you might have to go to fine-tuning. But how do you decide what you do? Basically, how do you decide what to do? Help.
I mean, also here, I think this is a pretty exciting time, because I think a lot of things are changing from what Ted described. This is actually my experience, right? So things were pretty established. You have the features, and you put into an SVM or CRF or something, and I spent just a lot of time on feature engineering. I think now things are different, and things are quickly evolving, and there's a lot of new things to try, which can, but also sometimes be a bit confusing, because everything seems to be moving so quickly, even in the research field. So our guidance here for our own development teams, and I think in general also, is to kind of do a crawl, walk, run kind of approach. So just starting with prompt engineering is the cheapest, fastest, easiest. Everyone can do it. So let's start there, right? So just open up like this playground, and off you go, right? You don't need to have a lot of setup costs. So you don't need to know even a lot about machine learning. You can just start trying things. And this actually gets you pretty far. These models are really, really capable for a lot of things. Nobody knows exactly where the boundaries are. So they're really this proverbial black box. So even researchers now have to do a lot of these benchmarking things to understand, are the models good for this? Can they reason? Can they do this and this? So does it work for your problem? Again, try, and then also see where are the limitations. The next step is often this RAG architecture that's very popular now. And this is really helpful when you want to bring in more context, and context is quickly changing. So you want to ask about events in your city, right? Or you want to ask about your business. You don't want to ask a factual question that the model somehow learned from the internet data, right? So if you want to ask what's the capital of France, it doesn't change too often, I guess. And so it can probably just answer from its training data, oh yeah, the capital of France, Paris. Okay, fine. But if you want to ask about your finance account data and what's on my cost center, or you want to ask about the weather, these things change. So you need to bring in relevant, up-to-date context. And this is usually done via the search we talked about earlier with these embeddings. So often you send the query into a search engine of some sort, and you retrieve relevant context. And then this is added to the prompt and answering the question, right? So you could just look up some information about the weather and then answer the question, or you could look up things in a larger document corpus using these embeddings, and then this is called RAG architecture. So it's retrieval augmented generation. So first you do a retrieval, so search, and then with more context, you can better answer the question. The other reason why this is often used is that the context might just be too large to put everything into the prompt every time, and also that would be very expensive. So let's say you want to answer questions to SAP users about any SAP product, and you would have to put the whole SAP documentation from help.sap.com into the context. That's like tens of gigabytes, right? So it doesn't really fit. And even if it would fit, you would spend a lot of money processing all these tokens every time that you don't really
and also
need.
time, right?
So
because the model has to process it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you would put everything in the context, you process it every time, and you spend like millions of tokens every time. So you do a search, you retrieve the maybe 5 top documents that are relevant to the question, and then you have a meta prompt that says something like, oh, you're a helpful assistant. Please answer the following question, giving this context. Here's the context. Copy paste basically the retrieved documents, and then the question, and then you answer this. And fine tuning is then kind of the next level, where it's really about teaching the model new skills. Fine tuning is not so good to teach the model new knowledge. There, it's much better to do something like RAG, where immediately the model has access to new information as soon as it changes, while fine tuning doesn't really guarantee that it immediately learns new things. And it would also be expensive to have to fine tune it every day or all the time, right? So information changes, maybe the news change every second, and every second you have to fine tune it again. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So this is really more about teaching models new skills. A good example is one of the projects in our team where we do fine tune a model for ABAP coding. There's a lot of code generation models, but they're not so good in ABAP because this is a proprietary language from SAP. There's not so much open source project that the models have been able to learn from. So we do fine tune it to teach this new skill, which is writing ABAP code. Or in my team, we fine tune a model for information extraction from business documents. It's a very specific skill that we want the model to be very, very good at. And then we teach it specifically for this. And this is then, again, supervised training. You need training data, you need test data, you need to know machine learning. So much more effort in terms of the setup cost and the knowledge and the skills you need. And we often see that people are excited about technology and they say, we want to fine tune a model. And I think if you're want to learn new skills, I think this is great. I would definitely encourage people to try this out and learn these new skills that are super valuable. But in terms of a business case, I think it makes sense to go in this crawl, walk, run steps, and not immediately say, okay, we need to now fine tune our own model until you have kind of exhausted the other things first.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is kind of the maybe the funnel, so to say, how you should approach it. And I think you learn also along the way a lot about the capabilities and where are the limitations and where do we hit a ceiling and then we need to go to the next stage. I think this is the recipe that we usually follow.
I love that you just mentioned the ABAP model that you're fine-tuning, because I was thinking of a bridge to my next question and how to get to ABAP from large language models, and that's the perfect bridge. Because I often meet ABAP developers, right? Like I go to like hands-on coding events and we have so many ABAP developers that obviously I meet ABAP developers all the time. And they always ask me, like, what should I focus on? Like, what should I be doing now with all this AI? Like, will I be replaced? Or do I have to now learn how to fine-tune models? Or like, what do I have to now do to stay relevant? And I mean, now at least since TechEd, I can finally tell them there's an ABAP SDK, but what else can you tell them? You know, like, do they have to know everything about it to start implementing use cases? Do they have to give up ABAP entirely? Like, what would you recommend developers to do now? Daniel?
So I don't really know ABAP. So I'm one of these SAP developers who can't speak ABAP. I think this is fascinating, but somehow something I never really learned. I think what you mentioned with ABAP developers probably thoughts that a lot of developers have, not just ABAP, but also, let's say, quote unquote, good old, whatever, Java developers also, right? That have been coding for a long time. And now there's this technology that maybe looks a bit threatening and maybe could replace some of them a little bit. I would generally encourage people to just start experiencing this technology, right? I think there's a good thing in a way is that because things are very new, I think it's new for all of us, including people who have been doing AI research for 10, 20 years. So there's a lot of things to try out, and that kind of levels the playing field a little bit, because does it work for ABAP? Nobody really knows, right? We're just all learning together. And I think just trying out things is often the most valuable thing to do, rather than reading a book. I mean, there's probably not a lot of books because things are moving too fast. I mean, you probably maybe want to read a little bit of literature if you're really interested in this. But there's a lot of value really from trying things out and just practically learning that. So I would definitely encourage people to try out these AI for ABAP generation, including, of course, our new model when it comes out, which I think is a huge productivity booster for them, right? I think we see already a lot of productivity gains from tools like GitHub Copilot. So if you can be 20, 30% more efficient as a developer, you should probably do this, right? Not just to kind of keep up, but also just to make yourself more productive, more valuable, and get rid of some of the whatever more mundane boilerplate kind of stuff that
it's basically like really good code completion, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think there's different ways that kind of these kind of ghost tags, and you click tab and that completes the line for you. And there's some things that are a bit more complex. Kind of you write the comment and generate the whole function, and it's more like a chat interface. So I think the UX is evolving there as well. But if there's something that makes you 20% more efficient, you probably want to do that. I mean, you probably also use an IDE these days and don't write just in a plain notepad most of the time, right? So, and then the other thing, if you're really thinking, well, this is really cool, I want to learn more, then I said again, I mean, this is actually quite accessible. All the research is published on the internet, on archives and other places for free. All the models, most of the models are open source on Hugging Face. Even the proprietary ones usually are very accessible with a lot of free credits you can try. And yeah, I mean, why not learn something new if you're really keen on this, and learn a bit of Python and start playing around with this, go to a local meetup or something like this and connect with other people. And you probably know something about the very specific part of business applications that other people don't know, that you can bring in. And again, because things are all so new, it's not that you need to learn all the 10 years of how people have been doing feature engineering and computer vision or NLP. But they're also only like 2 years ahead of you or so, right? So that's I think an opportunity as well.
I actually went to a Code Jam. That's an event that we do, which is for free, so you should definitely check it out if you don't know it. You can basically request a code jam with our team, and then whatever topic you choose, one of us goes there and helps you code certain exercises. So I went to Munich to use the Python SDK for Generative AI Hub, and I met some other developers there, and they asked me the same questions, so I'm sure they'll be happy to hear this. And we actually tried out the orchestration service, and it's the first time that I used the orchestration service of Generative AI Hub in a code jam, because I mean, it was just really like announced at TechEd. I didn't want to use it before, and honestly, I was surprised, and also all the developers were surprised, because, I mean, I love SAP, otherwise I wouldn't be working here, right? But sometimes some things can be a little bit complicated. And the orchestration service you really just deploy the orchestration service, and then you can use all the models by just changing the name of the model. And I was like, this is too easy to be SAP, I really loved it. So Ted, can you tell us more about the orchestration?
Where's the note that I can implement?
Where do I have to deploy all the models separately now?
Right. I mean, the orchestration service, right? With the SDKs, and just being a developer, right? Python, JavaScript, SDKs are available now for Gen AI Hub. Java's coming at the end of 2024. ABAP SDK is coming in the first quarter of 2025, right? So we want to just make it as easy as possible for you to be able to use these large language models in these pipelines, and really, orchestration at the end of the day, right? It's just basically just combining this content generation with a set of functions, that are required in the business AI scenarios. And so this is really just helping you coordinate, manage how all the various AI components are deployed and integrated, and how they're going to react within a system or a workflow. And so you can think about these services and workflows, right? Then you can do it without needing all of this complex code, because at the end of the day, we want the code to get out of the way, right? We want you to understand, okay, what problem am I going to solve, and how am I going to go about solving it? And that, at the end of the day, I hope people can just understand. When you add value that way, you're never going to be replaced, right? People say like it's going to be humans with AI replacing humans without AI, right? So 100% to what Daniel said, leverage all the tools that you can to increase your productivity, right? And how orchestration service will help you is really just enabling you to take care of the various modules, right? And then switching out, you have templating where you can compose a prompt, and then with placeholders, and then you can just fill in those placeholders during inference, for example. Or you want to leverage the content filtering modules, or you can do data masking, right? Like you mentioned, sometimes people may be more sensitive about what data they send to a large language model, even if the large language model is hosted on AI Core. That's fine. So we have data masking where you can mask out PII that you select. Maybe you only want to mask out names, or names and addresses, or phone numbers and emails, for example, right? That gets masked out. We send that, then that gets sent to the LLM with the PII masked out, and then the result comes back, and then you can unmask it, right? So those are all the things that you could compose with the orchestration service, create your pipelines, and then execute them, right? And again, to what Daniel was saying, experiment in this way and then get to a solution faster. And so that's really how we really want to accelerate your time to value.
So we talked a lot about Generative AI Hub and how you can use the orchestration service and like implement all these processes. But how do I, as a developer, decide whether I should rather use Joule or create a Joule capability, or if I should just do a custom use case on Generative AI Hub?
Yeah, yeah. And I think coming from a product perspective, it's always end user first, right? So what is the end user trying to do? What is the business process that you're trying to reason over, and what are you doing? So Gen AI Hub, we also within SAP Build, we're announcing Joule Studio, and that gives you the ability to be able to create Joule scenarios, right? That will allow you to extend Joule in very, very powerful ways. So if your end-to-end process is more of an automation process, right? Maybe an email comes in with an invoice and that triggers something. What kind of workflow does it trigger? Then you probably can just stick to SAP Build and then build some of the automated processes there. If it is something that you want a human to interact, then you can extend using Joule. And within Joule Studio, you can have a low-code way of being able to extend that. And then an end user is able to interact with Joule and interact with that scenario that you built, in addition to all of the other scenarios that are available in Joule. I think 500 today, and we're targeting 1,200 by the end of the year. So lots of rich capabilities that then you can add on to help your end user be able to accomplish the things that they need.
Good that you just said that you can also access all the other things, because often I'm being asked, so if I create my own capability in Joule, is that then the only thing Joule can do? And it's like, no.
Yeah,
You can do a lot of other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to think of it as almost like an app store, right? There's lots of Joule is the new iOS or Android, right? And then the user says something, and then the orchestration service will in the orchestration in the context of a LLM, assistant, right? Overloading orchestration here. We'll take that utterance and then describe, based on that, look at all the different descriptions of all the scenarios that are available and decide that this one would be the best, right? And it's going to be, so how you describe your scenario is super important, because that's what the LLM uses to decide and reason over whether that's the scenario that it should execute. But then that goes alongside all of the other scenarios that are available, and you're just essentially adding another app to the App Store or another scenario to the catalog that then Joule can reason over and bring into play to execute what the end user wants to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're unfortunately like way over time. I was planning this for half an hour originally, but I just didn't want to stop asking questions. So just one thing at the end. And I think both of you can probably answer that equally, but maybe Danny, you go first. So where do you think generative AI is gonna like make a difference in the future? Like, what is the next thing that we should focus on? Is it like agents, or is it just like adoption with what we already have? Or I feel like AI is so overhyped and underhyped at the same time. Like a lot of people experience their first hallucination and they're like, oh, this can't do anything. And other people think, oh, we will all lose our jobs. So give us like a little bit of a, like, I mean, I know you don't have a glass ball, but what's going to happen next?
Sure. Yeah, I think the variance of projections there are really, really, I mean, the variance is very high, right? So from AI doomers who are like, okay, they'll kind of kill us all, or at least take our jobs away, to, oh, everything will be fantastic, right? The rainbows and everything. Who knows, right? I'm not super good at predicting the future. I think it will be somewhere in the middle for sure. I mean, that's my personal guess. I think for me, it's really about good use cases. I think that's also what leads or what inspires us at SAP. Mostly think about the user, the value, the business application. I don't see too many exciting applications somehow. I think there could be a lot more things that people do. I mean, sure, ChatGPT and these kind of digital assistants, I think that's like a common thing. Everyone is using that to some extent, or at least has access to that. I think the GitHub Copilot, I think, is a great example of a good application that really addresses a value, and also you see people are willing to pay money for this, right? And so there must be something which is not like, oh, this is cool, right? Because I think let's play around with this and look, it can also write a poem kind of phase. I think that is kind of over or ending, and people have tried this now, but after a while you're like, yeah, okay, fine. So I think it's really about finding good applications that also have a willingness to pay in the end, if you think commercially about building a successful business. Yeah, I think like agents are a super hot topic at the moment. We have teams working on this, building first prototypes that will be part of Joule. And I think there's a lot of other cool technology topics, but I think it will be somewhere in the middle. I think we already do see helpful and useful and valuable applications. So this is not just like a hype and some buzzwords and then it completely goes away and everyone says, yeah, that was never working. So this is working. People can convince themselves that this actually works, but it also has limitations, as you said, hallucinations and other things that we haven't solved yet. So I think it will be somewhere in the middle, and it really depends on the scenarios and the use cases. And there will be stuff that we say, oh, this is a nice feature. It really saves me some time. And maybe also a few things where people say, oh, I mean, yeah, maybe we're a bit too optimistic here, right? It hasn't solved cancer yet, or these kind of things. Yeah, we still need humans here because people somehow want to trust let's say, a human lawyer with their case and not just ask a chatbot, which might or might not be correct, right? So I think we'll find these good applications and the value and also the limitations and risk based on application levels rather than on the technology per se, because I think it makes much more sense to look at a specific application and say, can we live with the fact that this is not always reliable? What is going wrong if maybe there is a wrong answer that's hallucinated up? Is that a big problem when you maybe want to do your travel expenses? Maybe not so much, right? If it's about a medical diagnosis, maybe a bit more high risk and we shouldn't fully automate this. So I think this is the best way of going into this. But I think we'll see a little bit of this hype cycle thing. I think this AI will solve everything within the next 3 years. I think will go away a little bit, and some people will be disappointed. But I think there's certainly a real substance of real applications that will go to this plateau of productivity, and I think some of them are already kind of approaching that. So it depends again, and we need to test. But yeah, I think there's something real, and there's a bit of hype, and it will be kind of leveling out in the next years, I feel.
I always like to compare it to search engines a little bit, just that with search engines and we had to learn how to use it, right? We had to learn how to ask the question to get what we wanted. We had to learn we can, I don't know, just send everything through open source translation services. We had to learn how to basically use the internet. Just we had a lot more time to do it. And now we kind of have to learn how to use large language models because it's just like another tool. Yeah. It's just this time we don't have 20 years.
Right. Right. I mean, people were also like, oh my God, Wikipedia, this will be terrible. Everyone can write everything. How do we know anything is true anymore? You're not allowed to cite Wikipedia. And that the world hasn't ended. People use Wikipedia. Sometimes there's a mistake, but it works. And I think it will be something like this as well. Yeah, people use these models. They work. Sometimes they make mistakes. But I think
Ted, you've been nodding a lot. I think you agree.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement. I mean, it's like I think to your point, what you said, Nora, about learning to use the internet, learning to use the search engine, right? I'm in complete agreement with Daniel. I just think back to the first television commercial, right? The first television commercial was a picture and a radio ad that played in the background. Right. That's what people thought in terms of how you could use television, right? Because we only knew about radio and television can transmit images. Okay, so we'll just stick a picture there and listen to a radio ad. And I think it's very similar with these large language models and Gen AI, where okay, they can probably generate emails, they can probably answer some questions and stuff like that. But figuring out what they can do is a real-time conversation that we're all on a journey on together, right? And that's what's so exciting. Going back to the earlier example of reverse psychology, right? Who would have thought? And then you get into agentic AI and things like a reasoning and chain of thought, right? Tree of thought, these types of techniques. The ability to do a plan creation and orchestration and just all of these things that we're learning of these capabilities and trying them out. And some of them will be very successful, right? Some of them we will see a lot of great gains, and some of them, may not be very interesting. But I think, to what Daniel has been saying, let's keep on trying. And for me, I think it's also is thinking about making sure that we understand that we're solving the important problems, right? I know that sometimes the temptation is to go after these shiny things when, yeah, they're cool, right? But at the end of the day, what are the biggest problems that people face? How can we free people up from a lot of the mundane tasks? And how can people spend more time on high value work, right? And thinking about what are those things that we can tackle. But as to where Gen AI is going, right? I mean, we can probably see things out a little bit, in the sense that probably from a native capability perspective, right? The more multimodal capabilities, a lot of the speech, text, vision, video, right? Even some of the stuff that we're doing at SAP and building out the SAP foundation model, a table native foundation model where you're prompting not with text, but with tables, right? And then getting a prediction from of the tabular data. These types of things, right? Native understanding of different modalities of data, agentic AI with some more reasoning and orchestration and planning capabilities. But then we might be totally surprised, right? As new emergent behaviors come out, and that's why it's such an exciting time that we're discovering them together and hopefully solving some of humanity's biggest problems together.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to stop the conversation. Although you just mentioned so many things I want to ask follow-up questions on, but maybe I just have to get you guys back at another time. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining me. It was really wonderful. I learned a lot again. I always learn a lot on these talks. I love that. Thank you for your time. Ted, I think good night probably fits it best for you. I'm just starting my day now. The sun finally came up. I don't know if you realized, but in between my light turned off a couple of times because it's so dark here in the summer. I forgot how dark it is, but I see some sunlight now. So I can start my day. And Daniel, I think for you, it's just a normal working day now, right? You still have a couple of hours left.
I got a couple of hours left, yeah.
Great. So thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time, and hope to see you here at some point again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
Great
much for having us.
conversation.
Bye. Okay, ja, cool. Danke.